So Dancing Squirrel asks an interesting question. I just made a 15.5% Imperial Stout with a final gravity of 1030. Despite the high, well, I'm going to insert the high finishing gravity. It's still a little thin and lacking body. Is maltodextrin my only option to add more body and avoid more sweetness? So here's my take on a few things here, Dancing Squirrel. A lot of times you would think with that high residual sweetness, which that is high residual sweetness. By the way, that's a bomb that you made, man. That's a big boozy beer. That's wild. With that high of residual sweetness, a lot of times we think that we're going to get, this body out of it, right? And it can, but there's a lot of factors, especially all that ethanol that's in that might be increasing the thinness, that might be leaning out the impression of the beer, that high level of ethanol. It sounds like the beer is young. It might be able to age a little bit, and you might be able to get some those higher alcohols that were formed inevitably in a beer that is that large. Those alcohol notes can actually round out into fruitier, more estery, fruitier things, and it could actually add to an perception of sweetness because of the aromatic shift that's happening in the beer. You're talking about adding maltodextrin. I've really struggled with that, man. I've not been somebody that adds maltodex to a beer and finds that it gives big body. I've taken small session style beers and bumped them up using maltodextrin, and the density, the number is measurably higher. Perceptually, I don't see the difference in the beer. That could just be me personally. That is an option. Some people will add lactose post, essentially boil, like a liquid, purge it, cool it, whatever, degas it, and then add that into a tank. That's a possibility. One thing I would check though is let's just be sure that pH is close to 4.5. Sometimes with a bunch of roast malt, you can really drive that pH down on the finished beer, and that acidity can be leaning that beer out. So this might be your real ace in the hole. Degas that beer, get a pH on it. And if you're finding that it's in the really low 4s or high 3s, try bumping it up to 4.5. You have some options with that, with food grade slaked lime that you have to be very, very careful with all of your PPE. I do believe I have talked about adjusting that pH up using slaked lime, so that's a possibility. Julian Schrago gave me some beautiful information on that for a pastry stout that I did, a fruited pastry stout. That was down by 3.8 because I used all this raspberry in it. I used this calculation and bumped it up to 4.2, and it was jammy, baby. Check it out. That might be an interesting little thing, but make sure to room temperature that beer, degas it, pH it, and if you're finding it's low, maybe look at bumping it up to 4.2 to 4.5 to see if it rounds out those edges, kind of builds it back up again a little bit. That might be a thing. But yeah, thanks for the question, Dancing Squirrel.